Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Syrett.
On this episode, the occultic influences on Hollywood and the arts, films and television as propaganda, and the use of predictive programming in popular television shows.
A lot of the writers and people who work on The Simpsons come out of Evergreen College. Now, if you look up the history of Evergreen College, it's a very well-connected, deep state, CIA-connected school. So my suspicion is that there is a kind of network or club that does relay to the people in the arts who are big-time culture drivers. And certainly the people who produce The Simpsons would qualify as that, and it is intentional.
This podcast is brought to you by BrightBiz. If you own a business or you've dreamed of starting one, there's a helpful free guide with 36 business power tools proven to boost sales, increase income, simplify your life, and give you better results with less effort. Best of all, this business toolbox is yours absolutely free. And these are useful online tools that make doing almost anything a lot easier. Just visit freebusinesstoolbox.com to grab your copy. I know there are a lot of websites out there that offer you a special deal on something, but then they stick you in some recurring program. This isn't like that. Relax. There's no hidden thing to try. BrightBiz is giving away this guide free of charge as a means of putting your best foot forward. But all good things must come to an end, so don't wait. Grab your free guide today. Visit freebusinesstoolbox.com. freebusinesstoolbox.com. That's freebusinesstoolbox.com.
Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Syrett. Pursuing the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from his studio beneath the stairs, here's Richard Syrett.
Welcome to your Friday. Hey, don't forget towards the tail end of this episode, I'll draw the name of one lucky winner who will receive a copy of my Strange Planet Volume 1 or 2 CD. If you want to get in on that draw, and I think we'll continue it for one more week, rate and review this podcast. Grab a screenshot of that. Email it to me at richardsyrett1@gmail.com. Don't forget to include your full name and mailing address, and then be listening Fridays when I reach into the ginormous novelty-sized jar of cheese puffs and pull out the name of one lucky winner. Hollywood under the spotlight, pun intended, on this episode. We have some of the movie channels here at the house, AMC and Turner Classic Movies, and so there's always an old movie running somewhere, sometime. And so I've been thinking a lot about the great researcher Jordan Maxwell, who I must get on the podcast soon. Maxwell talks about the origin of the name Hollywood. Traditionally, the magician's wand, like Merlin the magician from the Arthurian legends, the wand was fashioned from a holly branch, and so the name Hollywood. And the wand also used by conductors to conduct orchestras. But instead of conducting the orchestra, Hollywood, the wand is being used to direct the mind. And this is how films are used. Remember, Marshall McLuhan said the arts are controlled by secret societies. So it makes sense that films are encoded with certain memes and messages designed to control and manipulate the masses. Another guy who's really out front on this is Dyer. He does a fantastic job analyzing Hollywood film, discussing the symbolism encoded in film and the occultic influences in Hollywood and things like predictive programming found in movies and in television series. Known for his in-depth commentary and celebrity impressions, Dyer is the host of the Jay's Analysis podcast, Esoteric Hollywood. He's also a regular contributor to subjects as wide as satire, metaphysics, film analysis, theology, geopolitics, literature, and history, as well as interviewing numerous prominent figures. Jay has authored hundreds of articles already read by millions in just the past few years. He's also working with Jay Weidner on a new television series for Gaia based on this unique approach to film. He is the author of Esoteric Hollywood. Dyer, welcome to Conspiracy Unlimited. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I had Roseanne Barr on my radio program a couple of years ago, And at that time, she was doing this circuit and speaking out about Hollywood mind control. I don't know if you remember when she was talking about that in the media. What do you think she meant by that?
I do remember. In fact, I watched quite a few of those interviews, and I think she is absolutely correct. I think that most people probably aren't aware of a connection between the government's mind control programs, oftentimes called under the moniker MKUltra. They aren't aware of a connection between that and Hollywood, but it's flip sides of the same coin, just like the CIA is intimately tied into Hollywood. So what she means by that is the idea of social engineering, not just on an individual level in the sense of, like a Bourne ultimatum or a Bourne supremacy type mind control assassin. That's usually what we think of. That was an aspect to MKUltra, but really MKUltra was about social engineering on a large scale. So, dozens and dozens of programs, dozens of universities over several years, and it ties directly into Hollywood. And so you see this pattern in so many films, the idea of not just the assassin, but also of occult symbology, esoteric symbolism, the CIA mind control in the sense of secret societies. This aspect that she's hitting on is the root of Hollywood. Hollywood is, in a way, mind control and MKUltra.
Yes, there is certainly the large scale when we're talking about propaganda and psyops and that. But what about getting back to the sort of the original idea? You mentioned the Bourne supremacy, which, we could talk about a little bit of predictive programming as far as that film goes too. But what about the idea of the individual in Hollywood as an MKUltra victim? Because we see often, yes, there's a drug aspect to it in alcohol and so forth, but we see a lot of erratic behavior. Sometimes almost, I don't know, it's unfathomable what goes on there. And I'm wondering to what extent there are individual MKUltra victims in Hollywood. For what purpose, I don't know. But what are your thoughts?
I think that is a reasonable suspicion, a reasonable thesis. I don't know for certain as to who I could tell you is definitely a victim per se, but I think that a lot of the pop stars could fit that bill when you consider the fact that if we look all the way back to somebody like Elvis, Elvis had a military handler who quite consciously put him on pills and drugs, not just to mess with his mind, but so that he could be controlled. In other words, his handler kind of became his drug supplier. And once you're somebody's drug supplier, you have a tremendous amount of control over their lives, especially if they're addicts. And so that's one way to look at this is just that pragmatic way of controlling people. But I think that it's also reasonable to consider the possibility that, for example, as I'll be discussing in my second book, Esoteric Hollywood 2, there are a lot of A-list actors back in the 50s who were given LSD before even the counterculture troubadours like Terrence McKenna or Timothy Leary. It was actually Cary Grant in the 50s who was doing LSD with a lot of the jet set before Haight-Ashbury or the Laurel Canyon scene had even come about. So what I'm getting at is that I don't think that was accidental. I think that was intentional. I think people who were connected to high-level government, Royal Society, Tavistock type groups were giving test case LSD doses to A-list actors like Cary Grant. Now, does that mean that he's completely a mind control victim? Well, maybe in a way, yeah. I mean, he's being. The idea is what happens if we give an A-list actor this drug? What happens if we take Candy Jones and we send her on a USO tour while she's got a multiple personality? She's maybe Bob Hope is her handler, right? I mean,
right.
That's at least some people's thesis, right? So I think that yes, there is precedent for what you are saying, and I think that there are, as time goes by, we learn more and more about this. I only just learned about the Cary Grant doing LSD before anybody else, in the last year or so.
Right. Well, yes, you mentioned Timothy Leary, and there were LSD experiments at Harvard, of course, but also Princeton. But that was voluntary for the most part, and you had students who wanted to take part. But then you had, back in the 40s, people like Frank Olson who were dosed against their will, so the idea, though, of getting into the star system and the price ultimately to be paid for that. Katy Perry, you point out on your website, jaysanalysis.com, the story there of Katy Perry saying, "I want in," basically, to the Illuminati. I don't know how much of that was her being sort of satirical and so forth. But the idea, well, let me get your thought on that. What do you think? I mean, was she being satirical, or?
It could be on both levels. It could be satirical, tongue-in-cheek, and somewhat serious as well. It could be a situation where she, perhaps being traumatized, being through trauma-based mind control herself, that she thinks that the only way to find happiness in her life is, to serve these people that are handling her, her agents and so forth. Whatever secrets. She actually has, by the way, been inducted into different types of secret societies, and she's befriended certain witch covens and so forth. So what I'm getting at is that in her mind, it may be, that she thinks that this is how she climbs the ladder. This is how you get to the top. But it really does seem to require kind of giving away of your soul to climb that kind of a ladder. And I even think that when we see people like Miley Cyrus or Katy Perry go through these different phases in their careers, they usually come to a kind of breakdown period. They kind of have a mental, lapse and then breakdown around age 30. We saw that with Britney Spears.
Yes.
We've seen it with the Minds. I do think that it's possible that this relates to a kind of programming. And is there any precedent for that? Well, I would say, yeah. If you read, for example, Dave McGowan's book, he, in both Programmed to Kill and in Weird Scenes Inside Laurel Canyon, he talks about the different rehab centers being directly connected to the same psychiatric institutes that Dr. Ewan Cameron and Jose Delgado and the different MK Ultra doctors were involved in. There is a direct connect between rehab centers and the MK Ultra doctors. So I think it's plausible, at least, that the breakdowns that they have, and they're kind of being trucked off to these so-called rehab centers, it could relate directly to MK Ultra. And so I think Katy Perry is probably being honest and satirical at the same time. I mean, it's not like the people that control Hollywood are not the exact same as, Adam Weishaupt's Bavarian Illuminati, which was French rationalism with Diderot and Voltaire. You got something more hardcore with, Kabbalism and Crowleyanism, which is very popular in Hollywood.
Right. To what extent is Crowley's influence, or even further, someone like Anton LaVey, to what extent did they still have an influence?
I would say pretty influential. I think, a lot of the older writings that LaVey put out in like the 70s were in many ways prophetic, I think, because he was connected to a lot of government people, a lot of insiders, a lot of CIA individuals. And that's how, for example, I was just reading something from LaVey in 1974 about a week ago, and he was talking about sex bots. In fact, LaVey in 74 said that the introduction of sex bots will be the norm in our time period.
Amazing.
So he was right. Yeah, he was right in that regard. He talked about Hollywood as the new Babylon, as did Kenneth Anger. And of course, he's definitely, a successor to the idea of Crowleyanism. I would say it's very influential in a kind of underground, subtle way, which at times bleeds forth because, for example, CBS is just now about to come out with a series, Strange Angel, and that's based on Crowley and Jack Parsons. So they're actually making a television show on CBS about Jack Parson, the rocket scientist, the founder of the JPL lab, and Aleister Crowley. So there's the proof for esoteric Hollywood. I've been writing about it for a long time. A lot of people were very skeptical. Oh, that's not in Hollywood. Hollywood's not about cults and mind control and Crowley. And, well, here's a giant, big production TV show they're about to do.
Right. The Harvey Weinstein flap, I mean, obviously, if true, and I have no reason to doubt, is horrible. But to what extent do you think that is almost a distraction and a cover for a far greater sin going on in Hollywood, and that is pedophilia? It
is. In fact, I think I had a video kind of giving roughly that very analysis. I said something to the effect of, it's unfortunate that the idea of the casting couch is somehow given all of this media attention when everybody knows that the casting couch has been the case since the beginning of Hollywood. I mean, right. You have to be a complete idiot not to know that, a lot of leading ladies slept their way to the top. I mean, Marilyn Monroe used to joke about it.
Sure.
Having to do this. So, yeah, I think you're spot on that it's almost like it was maybe deflected by PR companies to focus on, Harvey Weinstein's rape situation or allegations. And it also, I think, was deflected into feminism, right? It became a thing of, it's Me Too, this hashtag, and women saying that, somebody grabbed my butt one time. And, I'm not saying that you should have your butt grabbed, but that's certainly less serious than the situation that you're talking about, which, a lot of documentaries and exposés have dealt with, which is pedophilia. Corey Feldman's talked about it. You have Open Secret, the documentary that covered it. That's a much more serious concern, and it's been going on for a long time. And I think, it's deflected and it's covered up by these, lesser, much less gravity situation.
Right. But yet still, yes, we have these documentaries, but it hasn't broken through in the North American scene in terms of media coverage the way, for example, the Jimmy Savile case in England did.
Right.
What's preventing that? I guess that's somewhat of a rhetorical question, but what's preventing it from breaking through, and what is it going to take? Do we need a special counsel like a Robert Mueller to investigate something from the Department of Justice to investigate Hollywood?
That's a great question. I don't know what it would take to I think, unfortunately, and I don't want to be too negative, but unfortunately the culture has been degraded pretty far. And when you get to a certain level of degradation and desensitization, it's almost like the next kind of scandal will almost normalize it. So I'm not saying it should be covered up. I'm not saying anybody should get away with it. But I don't know if there is a system-based way to actually solve that kind of a problem, just because the decades and decades of psychological warfare and social engineering has so degraded people in a general sense that I think it would be very difficult through normal channels to try to fix that problem. But I think that anytime somebody does try to step up and do something like make a documentary or call attention to it, or, whatever you think about Corey Feldman, I tend to think that Corey Feldman was telling the truth. He seems to have been vindicated in most of what he talked about. They are kind of made fun of, or kind of they're sort of turned into a clown show by the media on purpose to cover it up. And so, as long as the media and the establishment is going to cover it up, it's going to take a lot. I don't know what. I mean, I kind of, whatever you think of Trump, I kind of hoped, or at least had my fingers crossed, that Trump would call attention to this. He talked about it a little bit. There was discussion of, busting up trafficking networks and so forth, and there has been some of that. But is Hollywood too powerful? Are people too entrenched to really bust any of that up?
Oh, I agree. I think if there's anyone, it would be a disruptor like him. He's almost reckless in that regard, which is what is exactly required at this point in history, is someone with that kind of recklessness. Let's hope so. I mean, where is the Me Too campaign for people like Corey Feldman or his late friend Corey Haim, who obviously had huge drug and alcohol problems, but apparently was also a victim, which may have led directly to his drug and alcohol problems, that he was a victim. So, yeah, where is their bloody Me Too campaign? But how high up does it go in Hollywood? That's the big question.
Well, you know, from all the people who are whistleblowers and who do say that this has happened, they believe that, or say that it goes to the highest levels. You know, who that is still nobody knows. That's been kept under wraps, so I can't speculate on who. But you know, there are people who've written about older stories and scenarios where this happened. You know, you have the cases, I think, of the Mamas and the Papas. You have which is music industry, but still relevant to Hollywood because it was the Laurel Canyon scene. So plenty of cases of that in the past, you know, biographies of people saying that they were molested. So, you know, and then they have the problem of something, you know, if it's decades later, how exactly do you prove it? It makes it much more difficult to prove. Right. But yeah, you know, most people who write on this, most people who've written books on the subject of like the Franklin cover-up, or as you mentioned, Savile, it seems to pretty clearly go up to the highest levels of power.
And what is the connection, if there is one, between these pedophile rings in Hollywood and the influence of, let's say, the Church of Satan, or someone like Crowley, who was famous for saying that ordinary morals are for ordinary people or ordinary men. In other words, you know, we are gods. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah, I think with LaVey, you have in the Church of Satan, you have something that's much more kind of consciously theatrical and atheistic. I'm sure that you could find different people in those circles who were involved in that kind of stuff, but I think that, you know, with the Crowleyan type stuff, it's much more overt because there is a belief in the reality of defiling of the innocent. Now, I understand that that's somewhat part of the LaVey type view, but it seems to be a little more serious, I guess you could say, in the Crowleyan type perspective of the belief in the power that's gained through defiling innocence in certain situations. So I would say, yeah, I think that the idea that you can become your own god, apotheosis, which is kind of the root of that system, you know, your own will dominating master-slave type worldview. It's a very Nietzschean type worldview. I would say that, yeah, that absolutely contributes to the idea that you know, I can do whatever I want if I can get away with it, and because there's nothing objectively wrong. They're essentially moral subjective systems. How
do you feel? In contrast, we have the emergence of these Christian films that are doing relatively good numbers at the box office. How do you see that developing?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting development that I guess you could see in a way parallel to the election of Trump. I mean, you know, you have kind of the two coasts, very, very different and divorced from the mindset of the flyover country of, you know, the rest of America, which tends to be more conservative and to have a little more reservation about morals, and, you know, to not be so extreme. And I see it's similar to well, I don't want to get necessarily too political, but I think there's a definite connection between these two realms. And I think like Kevin Sorbo, he's had a lot of success with his films and his company.
God's Not Dead, yeah.
Right. And I did see those. I didn't think they were. I think sometimes they're a little bit cheesy, but I think overall the message is good. I thought the Ben Stein documentary, which is not explicitly Christian per se, but in the same vein of critiquing the sort of radical Darwinian perspective, I thought his documentary was good. I think we're going to see more of that, and with the ease of attaining different types of media through the internet, I think that there's going to be a lot more competition. So in other words, the traditional studio system is going to be dead. Basically Disney's buying all that anyway. So you're going to have Disney, and you're going to have people offering a lot of different streaming options for content. And I think that because you do have a lot of religious-minded people, they're going to be looking for that kind of content. And a lot of people are already, trying to step into those markets. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need more competition against these, monolithic, older models, legacy model studio systems.
In many ways, seems to be the front line in the culture war.
Absolutely.
I'll get back to this fascinating discussion with the brilliant Jay Dyer in just a moment. I want to speak to all of the dog owners out there. Raise your hand if you'd like to have the obedient, well-behaved, loving dog of your dreams. Okay, then listen to this. How would you like to develop your dog's hidden intelligence and eliminate bad behavior once and for all? Well, a woman named Adrienne Ferricelli is a professional certified dog trainer, and she's helped hundreds of dog owners train their dogs to be well-behaved, obedient, loving pets by bringing out the hidden intelligence inside all dogs. And you can quickly eliminate any behavioral problem your dog has, no matter how badly you think it's ingrained, no matter what kind of dog you have. The science behind this is simple. You may have heard of neuroplasticity in the human brain. Our brains are capable of learning new behaviors because of this neuroplasticity. Well, your dog's brain has the same plasticity, and with the right mental stimulation that Adrienne teaches, any dog's brain will become more open and receptive to learning new information. Your dog will listen to you and understand what you want it to do. And when this happens, bad behaviors simply fade away as more desirable ones appear in their place. So, if you want to check out this remarkable dog training system, just visit realbusinessbargains.com. That's realbusinessbargains.com. realbusinessbargains.com.
Richard has tiny talking insects living in his sock drawer. We are bugs, and we are living in Richard's sock drawer. Conspiracy Unlimited. With Richard Syrett.
Jay Dyer is with us. jaysanalysis.com. jaysanalysis.com. Terrific website. Let's talk a little bit about when you unpack a movie and you look for the symbolism. And I think it was Marshall McLuhan who said something like, we lie to each other through television and we tell each other the truth through film, or something like this. I don't know if that sounds, if that's familiar to you or if I have that right, but it's stuck in my head over the years, and I think it was McLuhan. It's interesting, in Hollywood, you have films like from guys like Oliver Stone, who's kind of an outsider to a certain extent.
Right.
Makes a movie like JFK, which I don't think could be made today. How do you feel about that?
No, in fact, I'm a big fan of Oliver Stone. I was honored to be alongside him in a recent Sean Stone production about Hollywood called Hollywood DC, which ran on RT. A very good documentary, which you can find on YouTube. And I think Oliver made some really poignant points in that documentary about where he's seen Hollywood go over the years. I think he's spot on to note the insider connection of the Pentagon, which he has known about for a long time. But of course, that's something I didn't really catch on to until I went to college and sort of studied that topic. But I think that the way that we see culture being driven is not through the means that most people think. Most people think of culture being driven through, organic artists spring up and they put their music out there, they put their message out there, their book out there, and it just happens to catch on. And really, it's not that way at all. Stars are created. Stars are essentially products that have a whole lot of money put into them over several decades, and they're created for a reason. And so, the arts, all the way back to Plato, something I discuss in my book, have always been tools of propaganda, tools of the state, tools of telling the state's narrative in many ways. And in our day, of course, we live under a kind of corporate state. And that's why you'll see somebody like Katy Perry. If you remember one of her videos a few years ago, I forget the name of it, but the whole video was essentially a military recruitment ad. It was her joining, her boyfriend leaves her, and she joins the military. It's sort of ludicrous, but unless you're really committed to fighting, America's wars for Halliburton and, to make sure that Iraq can get a Subway or a McDonald's, there's not really any reason to fight these wars anymore. And that's really something that Oliver Stone picked up on a long time ago. That's why he was making these anti-war films a long time ago. And I think that really hits the nail on the head. That's the essence of it all, is that we're really serving a system that is not beneficial and does not give us the things that it promises. We're serving this sort of Pax Americana that really has no connection to what most people think America is and what it represents. And it's gotten even worse, in the last, several decades since Oliver Stone was making his films. And, the high points like JFK, I think in what's interesting about Stone's films is that he really kind of hits these high points of the turning in American culture. We can't forget The Doors either. The Doors was central to this turning point in American culture because they represent the Laurel Canyon scene.
Yes.
If you've read Dave's books, and Oliver Stone was cognizant of the fact that there was this backdoor occult connection with Jim Morrison, because there's that scene in the movie where he undergoes that ritual initiation with that witch girlfriend that he has.
Yes.
And so, the more that I think about Oliver Stone's films, he really does pack the whole message into the totality of his corpus. Another analogy that I make throughout my book is to the mob. And if you understand different mobs and how the mafia works, you can really understand a big part of how America and the world works in geopolitics. And now that I think about it, if you go back and watch something like Scarface, that's really what that movie is about. It's about him coming to America thinking that he can achieve the American dream. And then he finds out the American dream is really just becoming a drug lord. And it ruins him, right? But it ruins him because he isn't willing to go all the way to killing children. And that's the point of that. Tony Montana gets killed because the serious drug lords, mandate that he kill some UN guy and his
That's right.
child.
There's even a line he won't cross.
Exactly. And so the degradation is even darker than somebody like Tony Montana knew. And I think that was the point Oliver Stone was trying to make. It's the same point he tries to make in Wall Street. Here's a middle-class guy thinking that the American dream is to become the Michael Douglas character, Gordon Gekko. And Gordon Gekko is just a ruthless, viper who's going to screw over the entire middle class that Bud, the Charlie Sheen character, represents. So, anyway, I think you're right to look at somebody like Oliver Stone as an outsider who's been telling the truth the entire time if we had eyes to see and paid attention.
The flip side of Oliver Stone's JFK would be something like Tom Hanks' Reclaiming History, or what do they call it? Reclaiming History. That was a Bugliosi book. And we often think of Tom Hanks as maybe the best that America has to offer. He's the boy next door. He's kind of our generation's Jimmy Stewart. He came to Hollywood as kind of an outsider, but he seems now to be the ultimate insider in terms of pumping out this propaganda. There was the Reclaiming History series. There was what was the movie about the Pentagon Papers? The Paper. Just a piece of crap. I mean,
yeah, propaganda.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not a Soviet or a communist, but once you kind of understand the dialectics of the Cold War, which I think I do have some degree of understanding of, I'm not as hyped up about the CIA's exploits in the Cold War as I used to be, maybe when I was younger and kind of believed the which is really just a CIA narrative anyway. But it was Tom Hanks that was in that Bridge of Spies. That was another example of the propaganda that you're talking about.
Yeah, myth making,
which was really just to regurgitate anti-Russian sentiment, which this is something that Hollywood has really been hyping up for the last few years. I covered the film Red Sparrow with Jennifer Lawrence as the most recent instantiation of this kind of hyping up the Russia tension, Russophobia nonsense. And yeah, Tom Hanks definitely plays a big role in that because he's been in a lot of those kinds of films. In fact, I was just looking the other day at a kind of forgotten, obscure Tom Hanks film. Get this, check this out. Did you ever see Volunteers with him and John Candy?
I remember that. $2 Tuesdays back in the mid-'80s at the Odeon Theater. Yes, I remember that.
Well, what's neat about that is he plays a young, I think Yale. He's like a Yale yuppie upper class grad who sort of fumbles his way into, I think, the Red Cross accidentally, and he learns that, guess what? It's a CIA cover. And then he finds out that the CIA handler that is running this Red Cross operation is there to deal with the Golden Triangle drug smuggling.
That's right.
So here you have this goofy comedy that's basically showing that the CIA is running the drugs, and lo and behold, Tom Hanks is kind of playing the subtle skull and bones Yale grad.
Right. I think it was the Peace Corps. I think it was the Peace Corps.
That's it. That's Peace Corps. You're right.
Yeah. So what happened to Tom Hanks? Who got to him?
Well, I think that what happens is that there's kind of an understanding about when people rise in the ranks of popularity and fame that if you don't go along with the plan, basically you're just not going to get the big deals. And in order to get the big deals, the big concerts, to have the Fortune 100 behind you for, to be a Katy Perry or a Lady Gaga or whoever, you've got to go along with the plan. And the plan is 100% coordinated across these giant mega corporations. And that's very transparent. It's very easy to see this. It's amazing that more people don't see it. But, Pepsi is going to promote the same thing that Monsanto is going to promote, which is the same thing that the Pentagon is going to promote, which is the same thing that Bayer is going to promote, and it's global. And so there's the proof of the global plan right there.
Right. You talk about the 2015 movie, The Martian. You say it's a documentary. What do you mean by that?
Oh, that was more of a satire piece. Sometimes the movie reviews that I do are somewhat satirical, especially if I don't like a movie. I'll write something that I think is pretty ridiculous. And in the, I just really, I like older Ridley Scott films, something like the Alien series or obviously Blade Runner. But I really just thought The Martian was terrible. It was ridiculous. It was stupid, and whatever you think of the moon landing, I thought that this was almost kind of like a mocking of the moon landing, but transferred to Mars, because it almost reminded me of an attempt at a serious version of Capricorn 1.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's like I feel like I'm being insulted if I'm expected to believe that Matt Damon's growing potatoes on Mars. And he's basically using I'm not kidding, like duct tape and tarps to get his ship off of Mars. It was just preposterous. And this is actually pretty close to, the real story of, astronauts playing golf on the moon or something. It was ridiculous too.
Right. No, I wasn't sure maybe if you were pointing out this is an example of some sort of predictive programming that we're already on Mars. Could
it be?
Yeah.
I do think, there is a space program that's covert.
Yes.
There is a very advanced, obviously, aerospace technology that is kept secret. But my view is that the real space program is something covert. We aren't really told much about it. We have to do a lot of speculation. I think that things like SETI probably dealt with the erection of large-scale surveillance. I don't think that it was. I think that the alien stuff was probably a cover, and that really what they were doing was the same thing they were doing with number stations during the Cold War, which is basically setting up a giant global surveillance grid. That's my theory.
Interesting. I'd not heard that before. Yeah. Wow.
It's just a theory that I'm sort of tossed around. I can't give you 100% proof of that, but just my speculation. But and the reason I say that is, well, what would they be more interested in, sending ET an email or having a giant global NSA that can track everybody's conversation.
It makes a great deal of sense because, I mean, how long has that been around? 40 years? What do they have to show for it on the alien front? One supposed wow signal, which has been debunked. Right. So, why would they keep that thing running? It's certainly, they're not looking for aliens. You're definitely on something there. I
don't think so, yeah.
So,
but that's just pragmatic speculation. I don't have like a document, that proves that or something.
Explain how predictive programming works. What that term means, actually. What does it mean?
I'm not sure who first came up with the term. Probably somebody like Alan Watt, who's a long time sort of geopolitical conspiracy researcher. He probably first coined the term. But the idea is really just similar to what you see in advertising or what actually comes out of wartime psychological warfare. And, this has been studied to the nth degree. Something that I focused on in college was looking at the connections between filmmaking and propaganda films. And a lot of the people, for example, from the OSS were people from the advertising world. And they were also people who went into television. So you have kind of the combination of Madison Avenue, PR companies, and the original people in like RKO and CBS Pictures and so forth. They were all out of wartime psychological warfare operations. And I think what that suggests is that all of these three realms coalesce into the same basic approach to manipulating the human mind and human behavior. And so predictive programming is just one aspect of how this could be done through either fiction stories or through movies, essentially, most of the time, but also artwork. It could be album artwork. It could be music at times. And the idea is to basically suggest ahead of time what you're going to do. So a lot of people liken it to something like gaslighting. If you've ever seen the old George Cukor film with Ingrid Bergman, Gaslight, this is the same idea where you kind of say ahead of time what you're going to do, and the audacity of that and the seeming projection of power in that you are in a way kind of predicting the future.
Right.
It's because, of course, you're bringing about that future that you're predicting. I kind of it functions on many levels. So it softens the public up. It gets people prepared for it. So you're watching Minority Report in 2001, I think 2002, somewhere in there. And Spielberg is showing you the idea of predictive algorithm crime tracking, and then 20 years later, you have the CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty, saying when we erect the smart cities, they're going to have pre-crime. So
right.
This suggests that Ginny Rometty doesn't have a crystal ball. It suggests that this was known to be implemented a long time ago. And great examples of this would be the writings of H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells, in Shape of Things to Come, he wrote that, I believe, in 1936, and he predicted World War II 1 year off. He was 1 year off as to when World War II would happen.
Right.
Which is quite phenomenal.
Some of the really creepy examples of predictive programming. So, for example, in American Dad, where in one episode they, I've read about it, I haven't seen the episode, but they predict the Boston Marathon bombing.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that work? How does that happen?
That's a good question that I don't think anybody has exactly pinned down, but my suspicion is this, and some of this I can verify, but if you take, for example, The Simpsons, which have had a number of similar examples of what you're talking about, a lot of the writers and people who work on The Simpsons come out of a certain school, for example, Evergreen College. Now, if you look up the history of Evergreen College, it's a very well-connected, deep state, CIA-connected school. So my suspicion is that there is a kind of network or club or group that does relay to the people in the arts who are big-time culture drivers, and certainly the people who produce The Simpsons would qualify as that, and it is intentional. There are too many examples of such striking predictions for that to be coincidence. I mean, it's just impossible. And so my thesis is just simply what we look at where these people went to school, which is how people network in the modern world. What university you went to. We see schools that are quite clearly CIA recruitment schools. And the CIA is not, Cold War James Bond stuff. It's culture creation. That's what they do.
Right. They're fighting for the hearts and minds.
Yeah. And that's done through culture. That's why we see, the Pentagon putting money into TV shows like Cupcake Wars, right? Quite literally.
Really? I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, this was obtained. The WikiLeaks actually tweeted this out. The documents are real, but it was obtained through a FOIA request, and they looked into what television shows that the Pentagon had recently put money into in, I think, 2000. Well, in the last few years, basically, and it was numerous TV shows, and even ones that you wouldn't expect, like Cupcake Wars. And you say, well, why would the Pentagon or the CIA be interested in Cupcake Wars? And then when you realize that that's what the CIA and the Pentagon do is culture creation, it starts to make sense. Food is a huge part of culture.
Sure. But what memes what are they imparting in that TV show, aside from making cupcakes, that is going to change culture?
If I recall, in that specific example, it was something related to positive military recruitment. So they probably had a character written in that was, a veteran or somebody who was there to, just promote recruitment. A lot of times it's that kind of a thing. So, for example, in the 80s, Reagan actually allocated quite a bit of money, not just to building up America's defenses, but to promoting this in Hollywood. And so there was a lot of money put into films like Top Gun, right? This is another one of these, roughly speaking, recruitment films. And it worked. A lot of people in the 80s, I have family members who were very influenced by something goofy like Top Gun, and they felt like, I need to join the military, right? So a lot of times it's that kind of stuff, but I also go further than some researchers, and I say sometimes it's consciously, occultic type stuff, and it's consciously relating to large-scale ritual events like 9/11.
Right. We have, what was that TV show? It was a spin-off of the X-Files. The Lone Gunman. The Lone Gunman, yes. Now, that was an episode that came out like 6 months before the actual 9/11 attacks, and it was an episode featuring hijacked planes attempting to crash into the World Trade Center tower. I mean, you can't get any more specific than that.
Yeah, and now people say, again, if somebody's skeptical, I wrote about this in my book, but I'm not the only person to write about this. In fact, there have been quite a few academics who have written on this topic. Elliot Gaines, who's a professor, I think, at Wright University. He's a famous semiotician, and semiotics is the study of signs and symbols. Well, he wrote a famous essay about Independence Day and 9/11 because he noticed, again, not a conspiracy theorist, just an academic, he started realizing that there was a lot of imagery in films prior to 9/11 that had this very suggestive 9/11-ish look to it, like giant towers being exploded and collapsing, and the idea of the external threat and so forth, which oftentimes signifies in psychological warfare just the enemy. So, for example, I've cited instances where in the Cold War there was a lot of you would have examples. Well, take Twilight Zone.
Right.
There are episodes of the Twilight Zone which in the credits are listed as made in consultation with the Department of Defense. And you say, why would Twilight Zone episodes be made, aided by the DoD?
Right.
Well, when you think about the specific episodes, usually the storyline was the alien threat is something that military persons or personnel overcome, and it's not about UFOs. The alien is a representation representation of the foreign enemy.
Sure.
So what they're doing there is not necessarily, I mean, they could be prepping people for some, alien scenario or something, but in a more basic psychological warfare sense, what they're doing is just associating in the viewership's mind the connection between an alien threat and the good guys' military saving us in some way. It's just a very basic psychological warfare approach. But when you start to watch old 50s and 60s shows, you see it very clearly. James Bond is a perfect example of this in the Cold War. Fleming was very adept at this.
Sure. Well, he was MI6, or was it MI5? MI6, I think, right? Fleming?
Well, MI6, he was actually high-level psychological warfare expert. So he was he was a Royal Navy for a while, and then he kind of went into just straight-up black ops and psyops. And so he was actually organizing many foreign operations, which people didn't know this until it's actually recent studies of Fleming that have come out that have demonstrated this. It was speculated for a long time that that's what he did, but a lot of recent authors like Ted Cable and McIntyre have actually demonstrated this in his life, and which is interesting because if you read older biographies, like was a famous one by Andrew Leichett, and it didn't mention this, so one wonders if his biography wasn't kind of covering this up for a while, and then more recent books have exposed, or I guess maybe it's declassified. They don't really care. People know that Ian Fleming was doing some pretty high level black ops, but it was foreign military secret service, basically.
There is one theory that's out there. I'm sure you've heard it. It sounds pretty outlandish on the surface, but who knows, given recent declassified documents about Hitler's fate after the war, that perhaps he survived and was spirited away to Argentina. And I've read the theory, heard the theory that Ian Fleming may have been involved in that operation.
Yes, that's interesting. I've heard different theories on this position. Some people think that the idea of Hitler going to Argentina was actually concocted by British intelligence precisely for Cold War reasons. I'm not positive either. I could see it going either way. Fleming did seem to be consciously anti-German, so it's weird because he had in his personal library quite a few works on eugenics. And he did seem to be quite racial in many of the stories, but he also seems to be consciously pro-British, pro-West, pro-freedom, etc. So, he did hang around kind of the upper class, elite, noble circles quite a bit, and he had a lot of very wealthy friends. So I would say he was a Western man, a modern Western man. I don't think he was like secretly a Nazi or anything like that.
No.
But yeah, I would not be surprised if he wasn't involved in something crazy like that, precisely because his real life really is crazy.
Jay, when does Esoteric Hollywood Volume 2 come out?
I am basically done with the manuscript. I would say look for it probably to be available in a few months. So maybe best case scenario, 3 to 6 months.
Can't wait. And the website again, jaysanalysis.com. Hey, I've really enjoyed this. Great meeting you. Great talking to you. Thank you for taking some time to talk to me.
Well, thank you, Richard. It was a pleasure. It was a really good chat. I love the conversations where we can really cover a lot of different ground and not get stuck on like one topic. And you're really good at taking us all over the chessboard.
Appreciate it. All right. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. I'm going to have him on again. He's terrific. Now, before I dim the lights in my little studio beneath the stairs, we have our weekly draw, of course, coming up, and I'll tell you about episode 68, which drops Monday. But first, I keep talking about Life Extension's Mega Green Tea Extract because I believe in it and I want the whole world to know about it. Life Extension's Mega Green Tea Extract provides powerful antioxidant effects throughout the body. It contains health-promoting polyphenols, including a powerful antioxidant, which has been the subject of extensive scientific research. Why don't you pour on these multiple health benefits for yourself? Green tea supports cell membrane integrity, boosts liver detoxification, enhances immune function, and helps maintain healthy blood cholesterol, LDL and triglyceride levels, and much more. Life Extension's Mega Green Tea Extract is decaffeinated, and yet it contains more polyphenols in one capsule than 7 cups of green tea. And the Chinese have used green tea for therapeutic purposes since 2000 BC. More recently, volumes of published scientific findings attest to its multiple health benefits. 1 capsule a day is all you need. Give your body what it needs. Order right now from Life Extension and save 25%. Just go to smartclickidea.com. That's smartclickidea.com. smartclickidea.com. All right, let's reach into the jar. All right, and it is Peter Miller of Spokane, Washington. Congratulations. I'll send out a copy of Volume 1 and 2 of Strange Planet. I'll drop that in the post as soon as possible. Again, if you want to get in on the contest, just rate and review the podcast. Grab a screenshot of that. Email it to me at richardsyrett1@gmail.com. Coming up on episode 68, Dave Brody on pre-Columbian North America and the lost history of the giants. Until next time, I'm Richard Syrett. So long for now.
A new Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Syrett drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com. Blow your mind. That is all for now. Oh, and remember to share and give a 5-star review because we have huge egos and need love. We're like cats. We need constant petting.